Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 82nd Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our discussion forums twice monthly to demonstrate that open-minded listening can be a powerful educational tool and lead to common understanding of difficult issues. Today, our panel will discuss the idea of a national dialogue on race relations. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Philip Grom, CEO of the consulting firm Intelifran. Today our panel will engage in an open discussion about a topic that emerges whenever a significant racial event occurs. In recent years, there have been 10 or so events involving the killing of African Americans by police and the killing of police by African Americans. These events are usually followed by calls by politicians and others for a national dialogue on race relations. But as a rule, nothing happens of any consequence, and the politicians and the media move on to the next thing until another event happens. If we were to have a discussion on a national dialogue on race relations, how would we structure such an event? Who would take part? Exactly what would we discuss? And what would be the desirable outcomes? And I'm laying that out on the table for the panel. Anybody can chip in at any time.
I think there has to be some version of, I think it was the truth trials or the truth hearings in South Africa on apartheid. It was Bishop Tutu, where they just brought everybody together and spilled their guts. And I don't see that could exist in that form here, but there has to be some element of that at the grassroots level, some granular level, and it has to build from there. I think that there are so many small groups of people, black, white, doesn't matter the color, that are so entrenched in the way they are thinking that until, as Patty and I were chatting prior, the difference between the view of faith, the view of divorce on presidential candidates, how that's changed in the last 30 years, last 50 years, the same thing has to happen with race. Mm-hmm. And until that granular level starts to really occur on both sides of the equation, I don't think that it's ever going to accelerate.
You know, I think one of the first things that needs to be done to have this discussion is that there has to be a recognition that racism does still exist. And in too many minds, I think, people think that, oh, it's being overblown. It doesn't. It does exist. Mm-hmm. And there has to be the recognition of that problem before anyone can have a serious discussion about it. Because if you don't think there's a problem, you're going to sit back and throw your hands up and say, forget it. There also we have to stop the disdain for groups that perhaps are trying to bring these issues to the forefront. When the leader of Black Lives Matter met with the president, and I think they spoke for over 2 hours, if I'm not mistaken, I saw so much negative press on how dare the president meet with this man. And it wasn't everyone, but that attitude was out there. The fact that they were talking was good. Whether you like or believe in Black Lives Matter and that movement or not, you have to at least recognize someone is trying to listen to those issues, and that's a big portion of Black Lives Matter. We have to, I think, stop with the idea that Blue Lives Matters and Black Lives Matters are mutually exclusive movements. You can decry the killing of blacks, whether by police or by other blacks or by gangs, and still decry the murder and senseless killing of police officers.
So you're saying that if we were to have a national dialogue on race relations, that organizations like Black Lives Matter would have a seat at that table?
yes, I think they would have to come into that. They would have to have
What
it.
about the Ku Klux Klan?
Sure.
Sure, why not?
You know, things like South Africa does give you hope, but on the other hand, my pessimism comes in because I think racial animosity is part of our biological makeup. It's really hard to do that, and you know, I had an upbringing that didn't allow for racial animosity, but I grew up in a small town. There were 3 black families in town, you know, in the middle of Pennsylvania.
That was more than in the town that I grew up in.
So, you know, it's this kind of thing, and it's there, and I think we have to have good hearts to try to overcome that on an individual basis. So how would I structure it? I would certainly start on a local level, on a local community level, and I would try to set up, maybe under government aegis, maybe not, to start with small groups within a community, trying to bring together the community leaders and folks who have an oar in that water in your local town, and build it from there. Go to the county level, go to the state level, and eventually try to coordinate something there. Now, I don't know who would attend. You know, it's hard for me to see Al Sharpton and you know, President Obama sitting down together and talking about race, but Jesse Jackson maybe.
And Rush Limbaugh.
And Rush Limbaugh, yeah. It's just tough to
Along with David
tough to
Duke.
feel that, you know,
Yeah.
because those folks are public faces of their point of view, and it's very hard for them to change, although it's possible.
And you know, I thought about this a lot, that if you have this conversation, do you have it televised? And I would say, now in my mind, I'm thinking, no reporters, no television. And the reason I say that is I think you will get honest dialogue, because you will not have people playing for the camera. You will not have people hedging what they feel or denying things that they've said because there is a reporter there or the public is watching. If this is done where you can be open and express your opinions, I think, not, I could very
Well, then
well.
you'll have comments about transparency. You're not open to this, you know.
That's true. But I want the people at that table to have a open dialogue and not be restricted by their worry of what the public is going to perceive them. You know, eventually you could have things that were open, but I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Are you concerned, though, that the impact of that conversation wouldn't go past that room?
Oh, I think you need a summary statement out of those meetings.
Right.
But that's the granular level. If it starts there, then it's about as granular as you can get, other than talking to the person next door to you, and then just let it spread that way.
Yeah.
As I agree with you, there's showboating then that goes on if you're playing to the cameras.
Yeah.
So.
Brian, you're sitting there with these thoughts simmering in your head. I can feel it.
I've had a much different experience. I think I've shared with the group. You know, I was raised on military bases, and there were blacks, Asians. It was a very open, desegregated type of arrangement where you were advanced through merit. There was respect for anyone, whether they were black, Asian, Puerto Rican, Italian. There wasn't a sort of a politically charged. I think one of the issues we face today is that it's such a politically charged issue that it's hard to get it off the ground. You have a lot of groups that are latching on to it. That's their rallying cry, and we have to set that all aside so we can really, you know, face the issues. I agree. There is racism out there. I really struggle sometimes with the different movements that start up. I think there has to be a respect for where we've been and where we are now. You know, it was a watershed event 8 years ago, almost 8 years ago, when the first black president was elected. That was supposed to begin the healing process. I don't believe we're even close to that now. There's more division. I've never seen such division on a national level than what we see now. I mean, you know, people talk, they use Martin Luther King's name, they use other individuals' names, and I think there was a desire to have something resolved. I'm not sure if they really want resolution.
Who do you mean by they?
I think groups that go out, and I'm shocked that some of the reporting, when you have policemen that are shot and killed for the only purpose is to settle the score, it seems.
Yeah.
I think we have to be able to say, wait a second, let's take a time out here. I would agree, bring up the parties together without any television cameras, without any grandstanding, and start to deal with the issues. I don't believe it's systemic, but that's what we're hearing from our national leaders, is that this issue is systemic, and somehow we can never rid ourselves from it. I don't believe that.
You and Patty both mentioned that racism is still alive. What do you mean by racism? This is all white behavior toward blacks, or is it blacks?
Now, one thing that I think that it has to move from black and white. It needs to go from not only black, but other groups that come to this country. It might be the Ethiopians, it might be the Syrians, it might be small enclaves of people that live in the inner city for years and they don't speak a lick of English. Are they discriminated against when they go to the store or when they go to rent an apartment because they don't speak English or because they're from a different group of people? So I want to expand the group.
Yeah.
I want to say it's not just black people. There are people in cities. They might be Puerto Rican. They might be Italians.
Hispanic,
There used to be signs,
Hispanics.
and there used to be
American
signs that say
Indian.
no Irish need apply.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So let's expand the group and let's start bringing everybody under the tent, and saying let's try to solve the issues, because in certain parts of the country, it's not the black person that's being discriminated against. It might be the recent immigrant. It might be that Ethiopian family, that Somali family that lives down in Columbus, or
I'll give you one that's real time. The Tibetans.
Sure.
In North Akron, the Tibetans are everywhere. It's become a place where they've settled. Now the Akron Public Schools are closing down North High School, where all those kids belong, which, by the way, they have a killer soccer team as a result.
I can only
But-
yeah.
But now these kids are going to get distributed amongst the other high schools in
Yeah.
Akron. Watch it take place. It'll happen almost immediately,
Yeah.
unless the Akron Public Schools get out ahead of it and start to do some type of assimilation procedure.
I'm glad he brought that up, because there are Akron has some pretty vibrant communities
Oh, yeah.
of recent immigrants. There's a pretty vibrant Chinese community. I'm sure they
Bhutan, the Bhutanese.
yeah, I'm sure they experience some racism in their
Okay, so
daily life.
if we're talking about a national dialogue on race relations, we're not just talking black and white.
That's right.
Right.
But that's what the problems have been lately.
that
No-
you
no-
see,
nobody's
that
talking-
you're seeing that are getting publicized.
Yeah.
I was
Well, I
so
know.
shocked. It went years ago. I'd never realized how much discrimination was done to American Indians. I didn't realize this. And I had met someone who came from Arizona, New Mexico, whatever, and I had no idea that even existed, because that was not a culture that we had experience with. It's Hispanics, if we look at that. There are plenty of, I think, examples of that. I do have a question. Who starts this? Is it incumbent upon the president to start it? Is it incumbent upon the local mayor to start at the local level? Is it incumbent upon churches? How do you start the dialogue?
Who do you think would be in a better position than the current president of the United States to start
That's
such a
too
thing?
big.
And see, that's the thing. If you want to start on the, it depends
Well,
on
let's
where
start
you
with
want
this
to
show
start.
for a second. There's more coded language that I've heard on this show over the last year and a half, and you guys don't even know you're saying it. And it's not exclusive to the panel on this show. I hear it all the time. I hear it from people that it reminds me almost exclusively of the Eddie Murphy bit that he did 20-some years ago, where he puts white makeup on and goes in the store, and the minute a black person leaves, the storekeeper says, "Just take it." just take it. Like, and the minute a black person gets off the bus, all of a sudden the drinks come out, the music turns on, it's a
I've seen
party
that,
on the
yeah.
bus. That goes on at a very low level. Little phrases like, oh, don't get me started. Little things like that. When a race-oriented issue comes up, I see it in my news feed from people I never thought in a million years would act or behave that way and with different things. But it starts just in the phrases that we're using and the words that we're using. Liken it to smoking. 25, 30 years ago, you didn't think twice about lighting up in your office.
Or on an
On a
airplane,
plane, in a restaurant. Now, whether you smoke or you don't smoke, it just seems odd that someone would light up in a restaurant, let alone their office.
I haven't seen them do it. No.
So it needs to take, that type of thing needs to take place. That it just needs to become such a part of society.
Well,
that-
I understand that, and when you ask the question, who should start this, you're getting to the actual crux of the structure. How would it be structured, and what would be the best way? I mean, I was reminded the other day that the University of Akron did such a thing. They had several years back. But here's the interesting part. I don't know what they talked about. I have no idea what went on in that discussion. Bill Clinton, when Clinton was in office, he took an initiative that also had something at E.J. Thomas, where this was supposed to be a huge discussion on race. The conservatives were not invited. This was only liberals. And that how would we put together this national dialogue that so many people are calling for? What would be the expectations that would come out of that? I hear an awful lot about white racism and how white people have not yet come to grips with our racist and
White privilege.
Yeah, you hear an awful lot about that. I don't know that you could walk away from a national dialogue on race and feel pleased that you'd properly chastised all the white people in the country. Is there in the structure of a national dialogue on race, is this a two-way street? And I'm only talking about black and white now, because this call comes out every time a white cop shoots a black young man, or vice versa. We're talking black and white here. We're not talking, nobody's talking about Asians being beat up by the cops. What would we expect as an outcome? I like the 7 habits of highly effective people. You begin with the end in mind.
That's Stephen
Covey, yeah.
Well, the end has to be at home. One of my sons, his first girlfriend, black girl, I was completely unaware of the things that I would say in normal conversation that I had to stop, just on the perception that it may have come off as sounding racist, and realizing I use that kind of language on a regular basis, not inferring racism, but that it could be coded talk.
Yeah.
Same thing with same sex. If you look at any old television program, how often homosexuality is mocked in sitcoms that were top-rated television programs. Now, it's like you would hear, I mean, it's offensive at this stage because enough has occurred.
So one of the outcomes you're saying of a national dialogue would be to sensitize all of us to things that we say and do that might be offensive to...
I don't know if sensitize is the right word, be aware of it. It's no different than walking around in your house swearing, or having a drink for breakfast. I mean, there's certain things you just don't do. I mean, and by drink, I mean,
Shane.
The problem, too, is you're having a dialogue, or you have a dialogue, and the attempt is to change the way we think, to change some of our basic core beliefs. And that is extremely difficult to do. Number one, when some people don't even admit that they do have those core beliefs. They have it hidden inside for whatever reason.
Well, it's like Ron pointed out, it's part of our nature. to have a preference for people who are like
I
us.
think the best you can hope for is to develop a feeling of tolerance, even if you can't agree with someone. You know, I have an opinion about the current election, and you have yours, and you're welcome to yours, and you should have yours, and I should have mine. No need to stamp on each other and be uncivil about it. Let's stop at the memes, for heaven's sake.
Right. And it's not, it's the fact that I could really dislike you, but it's not because of your political party. It's not because of the color of your skin. It's because you're just a crummy person, you know, that type of situation.
Well, now that
It's
you bring
not
it up, Patty.
everybody-
Today's his birthday. Can we dial it back a little bit?
Oh, wow, all right.
The fact that
We'll be kinder to you.
we
Happy
treat
birthday.
people as people. We recognize our differences. We recognize our different ethnicities, but we don't judge based upon that. And that's a difficult thing to do.
I really can't remember when I met my first black person. You know, I don't think it was college. It was probably grad school. And those people were brown people. They were Indians and Hispanics. Not until much later, until I began to know some black folks on an individual basis.
I was in the Army.
You know?
That happened.
I was in school.
You know, I think one of the words that I think of is respect.
Yes.
Is
That's
that I
yeah.
can
Tolerance,
respect
respect.
everyone here on this panel for their opinions. I might not agree with them, but I can at least have a civil conversation with them. We can maybe agree to disagree at times. Maybe I'm persuaded to their issue. Maybe they see an issue a little differently. Maybe they're not as dogmatic. But the problem that we have now is we don't. The basis of our society is really based on a respect for the law, and I think that's where we start first. We have a respect that the law is blind. Justice is supposed to be blind, and we go from there. You know, when Ron talks about when he remembers seeing his first black person, I just thought to myself, I don't ever recall that particular moment because
You grew up amidst Indian culture?
Right.
I grew
yeah.
up with kids that had, you know, I've mentioned this before. Sergeant Harris was a black master sergeant. His wife was from Germany. She had red hair, and their kids, you know, we used to joke with them. We played with them. You know, there was another gentleman that had married an Asian, you know, an Asian lady, a Filipino lady. So there was this mixture of people, but we were all Americans. You know, we were all, you know, it didn't make any difference if your mom was white or Filipino or Italian or whatever. Your dad was black or whatever. So I think it needs to start at the community level. And we need to really respect people, and if there are issues, we deal with those. But you know, so many times organizations, they latch onto a thing and it becomes their rallying cry, and it's a non-starter as far as I'm concerned.
You know, when I think back from 1964 on forward, before 1964 Civil Rights Act, the whole idea of Jim Crow is just makes me want to cry even today. But since 1964, tremendous progress has been made, tremendous progress, especially in the South. And that there is a lot more racial harmony going on in this country than we want to acknowledge. We talk about race relations being at an all-time low. Well, I don't believe that.
It's true. Nobody's taking slaves anymore.
Well,
I was watching the documentary the other night about the 1968 elections, and particularly the Democratic elections, and it struck me that George Wallace, who was running on a platform of segregation, got 10 or 15% of the electoral vote.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
And that was in '68.
that was 68.
Yeah.
That was the Democrats in the South, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think I've mentioned before. I saw him speak in downtown Akron.
No, you didn't mention that.
Yes,
Are
he
you the
was-
one that shot him?
No, not that was prior to his being shot. He was speaking. He was in front of the courthouse, and I was attending Akron U at the time, and so it was just a short jaunt down. And I you know, I tend to be a little liberal, so George Wallace was not my candidate. But I've always believed that you can't just listen to one side; you have to listen to both. And as much as I do have to admit I had a mindset that I'm not going to like this. I thought I owe him the responsibility of listening to what he has to say.
Yeah. I remember my oldest child had a mock election in grade school and came home and told his mother, we had a mock election today. She said, "Who'd you vote for?" And he
Shirley
said,
Chisholm.
"George Wallace."
No, I said Shirley Chisholm.
You did not. Well, we've been
Boy,
telling the
that's
wrong
pretty
story.
smart.
Telling the wrong story, unless you have a secret family I don't know about.
Secret bigamister.
Now, I'm not sure how you would get those two mixed up. Yeah.
No, but back to the issue of racial harmony. I think that I do believe we are at an all-time high in racial harmony, not an all-time low. We're just advertising the daylights out of the events and giving a lot of press time to
It's like a
organization.
shark attack.
Pardon me?
It's like a shark attack. Shark bites one kid, then as soon as somebody sees 3 more sharks, it's all over the news. It's the headline story because
Yeah.
people are all about sharks. Same thing happens. You know, I see the backdrop here and I think about the people. I've got our 35th class reunion is this weekend, and I'm thinking about all the people that are descending on Wadsworth this weekend. Not like there's hundreds of them, but you know, a few dozen. And they're spread out all over the place. And when you talk about racial harmony, I think about the South. I've spent a tremendous amount of time south of the Mason-Dixon line. It's all Northerners that have migrated to the South for positions, for jobs, for careers, and they've taken those ideals with them. So when I say the granular level, I think about what goes on that town square, and then as people move out of the area and the ideals that they take with them. And you know, I had absolutely no exposure to anybody other than white people in growing up in Wadsworth. And so I formed my own opinions, and my first opinion was formed by a black guy who stole a bicycle from me my second week of college. So I had to get over that real quick. So but if there was some type of, whether you want to call it sensitizing or just educating on a granular level, it's got to start, you know, in kindergarten, like with languaging and everything else.
Okay, in our last few seconds here, how many think that there would be any benefit to come from a national dialogue on race? Just yes or no?
Yes, only if it pushed it
Yes.
down to the local level.
Yeah. We got to start.
Okay, well, thank you very much for a very good discussion, and I am not ending with a quote today. I couldn't think of anything smart to say. Thank you.